good morning. Happy New Year. Happier New Year. Happiest New Year. This is 2017, folks. It's time to shake off the old stuff, which you should have did last night, but I know some of you went and hung out. Celebrating the incoming year and the outgoing year as well, because you celebrate them both. You celebrate them both. You celebrate the end of what once was and the beginning of what's soon to come. God's decree. Always, always at work. So whatever the year brought you, right? Make sure it was some learning that you came from that year with, and make sure it brought forth some learnings that you need to carry into this year. And that's what's most important about years passing. It's history. It's history. And it will be repeated. It will be repeated. And the reason why it'll be repeated is because those events that took place through the course of the year will always, always be within you. I spent my evening, well, much of my week, reflecting on the year's events, reflecting on the pain, the grief, the sorrow, the beauty, the love, all of those things that came through that year. And there were many trials and tribulations faced. Things that I would probably say that at one point in my life that I would not have been willing to walk through. I would have walked around them. I would have shoved them under the rug. I would have bypassed them. I would have ignored them. I would have just acted like they didn't exist. But my heart was in the right place. And that's what this really comes down to for me. It's a matter of putting my heart in the right place, because oftentimes the head can be in the place of where your heart should be. And your mind is capable of telling you anything. Anything. The mind is sometimes a terrible place to be. Especially alone. And when I mean alone, not by yourself. I mean without information, suggestion, direction, words of wisdom, encouragement from others. So you should always have something entering into the mind from outside of yourself, right? But then there's that innate existence too that we have to draw in. We have to draw that in. It wasn't a bad year. It was another year, a year that I didn't think that I would see. You know, and I often talk about how when I was coming up, when I was growing up, like, it was times when I didn't want to see the next day. You know, there were times when coming into adulthood was just something I wasn't looking forward to. You know, I just wasn't. You know, I was good, right? And what I mean by I was good, I didn't want to face all those things that I saw adults facing in daily living. You know, I just wanted to be somewhere safe and secure, protected, until I began to venture out into the streets and had to learn how to protect myself. And then once venturing out into the streets, I really began to have a strong dislike for life, because it just seemed so frightening, so violent of a world. And it is. It is that. But that's just not what all living is about. And that was the corner that I eventually turned to realize that this was a life to be lived, that this life was full of nothing but trials and tribulations, and that the idea here was for me to learn how to overcome these obstacles You know, to not find these things as being mountains that were impeding my forward progress, but to look at them as being stepping stones. Stepping stones, mere stepping stones to get somewhere. And for me, that somewhere has been paradise. Therefore, my conduct is what I'm always seeking to improve upon. Because again, my thinking is always questionable. You know, because your mind can just, your mind can tell you anything. You know, you can look biologically at the size maybe of the mind. You have the brain and you have the mind, and sometimes we, you know, forget about those things. But our mind, and people think it's the brain, it's not the brain, it's the mind. You know, you can look at it, you know, in one of those muscular skeletal draw-ups, diagrams in your psychology books, in your biology books. You can look at it and you can't conceptualize how something in the size that it is and the capacity it is takes on a lifetime of events. And not only a lifetime of events, the mind is always absorbing. It's always absorbing. It is. It's just always absorbing information. It's not like you have a terabyte flash drive. One of the drives, I have an external drive, a terabyte drive, and it's 1 terabyte. That means that's, what is it, 999 gigabytes? You know, so that's a lot of information that goes in there. And a lot of times, you know, you'll get something that capacity, and then you start drawing everything from your different computers, and you start adding on music and photos and all that stuff, and before you know, it's in the red. And you're looking like, wow, I mean, I didn't put that much on there. This thing's supposed to take more. And then what you have to do is, to get it out of the red, you have to go in and you have to remove some things. You have to delete some things. You have to look at, is this that I'm saving worthy of, taking up this space? It's already at or almost above capacity. Do I really need to keep this? And the only things that you'll find that you keep are the most memorable of things. I want you to think about this for a minute. I want you to go with me on this. The only things that you will keep when your memory gets to or above capacity, right? When I say above capacity, I mean that nothing else is going in. It'll open, it'll function, but you're not saving anything. So that's what I mean about above capacity. Not that you're putting more than its intended capacity on, but you can't even save an A. If you put an A to a letter that you wrote and you go to save it, it doesn't have the capacity to save it. Well, it's the same way with the mind. The same way with the mind. See, the mind takes in so much. It just takes in so much, and sometimes in life, the mind can be so overwhelmed, and not that it can't take in anything else, it's just that it doesn't have the capacity to conceptualize some things sometimes because of what's connected. So you can't, it's really, listen, I'm not God. I mean, this is God's creation. God created this, and when we sit down and we try to conceptualize some things, you know, this is one of those things you can't conceptualize. You can't conceptualize the mind. You can't. But I'm just trying to use some analogy so you can begin to understand how everything that happens in life is always there. But somehow or another, the mind has the capacity to archive things so far down. It's like it has its own memory center, you know, where it has a network somehow where it goes somewhere else. Now where it goes, I don't know. But it's so much coming in on top of it and pushing it down, and then it's just the things that are most memorable. Those are the things that keep us in the condition that we are, the most memorable things. Right? Like when you getting good loving. Like when you have a family that holds you and loves you and kisses you and tells you every day that they love you, and they show it in their actions and their understanding, and they're empathetic, and they're doing all the things that families should do. Those things are memorable. And whenever you find yourself in a circumstance like that, and you feel all bubbly and fuzzy and stuff all inside, and you don't understand why, that's why. The memory itself does that. And it's doing that unconsciously. You're sitting there and you're just feeling this warm, fuzzy feeling, and you don't understand why, but it's the mind. It's the mind. You have to understand the mind. It is so deep. It is so deep. Right? So it's the mind that's really running so much of our lives because of memories. Hence the reason why it's so important. It is so important. It's of the utmost importance that moving forward, right, when you're interacting with others, remember that you are always giving them memories of you, giving them memories of that interaction with you. And sometimes the memories that we leave them with, right, of our interaction are sometimes desecrating of their humanity, sometimes offensive. And sometimes we don't realize that when we do those things to people, that we are causing them to relive their own memories of when somebody else did that to them. And sometimes that somebody else is a caretaker. Sometimes that somebody else is someone who had power and authority over their lives, who had the responsibility to treat them with respect and dignity, and failed to do that. And that becomes more prevalent to them at that moment when you're interacting with them. And sometimes when they react back unconsciously, they're doing the same exact thing. They're defending themselves, but they're defending themselves and they're giving to you what they wanted to give to the other person, or maybe what they did give to the other person, and it's not a good mix. It's always about looking at oneself. It's always about looking at oneself. And none of us look at ourselves consistently in every moment that we're exposed to. None of us. None of us are perfectly good. None of us are perfectly bad. None of us has one up on the other. There are things in my life that I have improved upon, right, as a result of me doing some work, and it's an area that you continue to struggle in. But the greatest struggle that most of us have is of being ourselves. Most of us have that struggle. Being ourselves. Just being who we are. And the truth be told, in many instances we feel like we can't. We feel like we can't. When we're around certain people, we feel the need to act a certain way. And I'm not just talking about, these so-called acceptable behaviors, this acceptable etiquette when you're around certain groups of people. Like you don't say yeah, you don't tilt your cap and all that other kind of stuff, because that's their biases, that's their stereotypical thinking of you. So you're acting out of character to appease these people, to make these people believe you are like them for whatever reason. But I'm saying that, like, in being yourself, like saying what you need to say, right, sometimes can't be said because you're protecting the other's feelings, and then you have to do this whole evaluative thing to see if it really needs to be said. Can you say it differently? Can you, not say it at all? Can you just avoid it? Can you just keep moving forward and pray on it and look for the change? And if the change doesn't come and it consistently shows up, how do you deal with that? So it's a whole lot that goes on. But at the end of the day, when you hear more than 1 to 2 people say the same thing about the same behavior, you start feeling like, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't. You begin to question yourself, and you start second guessing, whether it's appropriate or not appropriate, not bearing in mind that maybe it's just 2 people that have said the same thing that are in alignment with the same level of thinking, the same belief system. Because we all have different belief systems. But it's often said that when 3 or more people say it, it's a good chance that you need to take a look at it. In other words, if 3 people say it's a horse, you probably want to get yourself a 10-gallon, a saddle, some boots, and giddy up. Right? So you want to look at what it is that you're doing. You want to look at what it is you're bringing into this new year. Right? And last week, we were talking about the id and the capacity that the id takes up within the human being. And we know that the id, right, is the most dominant of the human being because it's the primitive and instinctive component of the personality, right? And you'll hear people sometimes say when people have dogs, if the dog walks by you and you kind of move away from the dog, oh, he won't bite. That's an animal. The primitive and instinctive personality, right, characteristic of that dog is to be an animal. You don't know when that animal will react to something. You don't know. You never know. So we should always be guarded. You shouldn't be foolish. I remember the day I was, I was living in West Oak Lane. I was on my way to school. I went to Wagner Junior High. And I had got up to, heck, I can't remember the name of the school. But it was just below, not Rodman, I can't remember the school, but it was about two blocks before I got to school. And I had turned the corner and I was walking up the street and there was this little dog sitting in the schoolyard. He was just sitting there, and just sitting there chilling and had a little, sad look on his face. And I walked over to him. He just sat there and he just looked at me with this sad little face. And I went over and I went to pet him and he bit the hell out of me. And then sat there and started growling and I backed up and walked away from him. And today I still have the mark in my hand where he bit me. I had to go to the hospital, get a tetanus shot, but he looked so innocent. But the primitive, the instinctive personality. Dog didn't know me, never saw me. Just because from my perception, the dog looked innocent, which he probably was an innocent dog, but what I didn't see was the abuse that he may have been subjected to. He didn't have a collar on. I remember it verbatim, very vividly, because I still have the wound from when he bit me. So, a lot of things happen in the street. A lot of things happen in the street. A lot of things happened in the street to me when I was on the street, living the life that I was living. Right? So I couldn't see those things. All I could see was the hurt. Right? And I, being who I am, wanted to pacify, wanted to do something. I guess to let him know it was okay. And that's the kind of person I am. But the primitive, instinctive characteristic of my personality is not as such. Right? And what I'm saying to you is that it doesn't mean that I'm a hateful, unloving, uncaring person. when we're talking about primitive and instinctual, we're talking about the core of who we are, and how that core has to be managed. Has to be managed, because there's the free will that we have, right, to go along with those primitive and instinctual personality components. So, and just to refresh that, the id is the only component of the personality, the only component of the personality, none other, that is present at birth. Truth be told, at conception. Because the development begins at conception. When those 23 chromosomes that each parent contributes come together, right? That's when it begins. Right? So all that lineage now is together from both sides of the family. From the mother's side and the father's side. They are now one. And that is you. This is present at birth. The id is present at birth, and it is present throughout our lifetime. We make it very clear. The id never changes. The id will always be the same. You will always be self-centered. And I remember reading some material over 20-something years ago where it talked about how some of us never outgrow the self-centeredness of a child. The self-centeredness of a child. Right? And today, years later, I'm speaking in, I've come to understand exactly what that means when I start studying human development. Because when you look at the ego and the superego, they have significant roles in the management of self, the id. So when people say you are being selfish, id is the self. The id is the self. That's what we need to work on, ourself. See? And people have to listen. I know I went a little too deep, right? Let me pull the line up a little bit so we get the middle water, because I went all the way down to the bottom. 200 feet deep water. It's cold down there. There's fish down there that you won't typically get from the more shallow water. So I went deep. I'm sorry. The id is the self. That's you. The core of you. That's the core of you. Right? The core of the human being is the id. It is selfish. So when people act out, and I'm going to just refresh you on this. When we act out, right? And people say when we do certain things that we're being selfish, you're really being idish. You're not being egotistical. Take egotistical out of your vocabulary, because it's an incorrect statement. It's totally incorrect. Yes, and I will argue you down on that. Look up the word egotistical. Right? Egotistical. Break it down. And I'll break it down for you next week too. Break it down. Egotistical. Statistical. So that means you're looking up two separate words. You're looking up ego and you're looking up tistical, because there's significance to that. You got egotistical, you got statistical, right? And you have other words that end with tistical. I didn't say testicle. I know it's early and some of y'all still kind of shaking off that, that thing from last night. I ain't gonna say what that thing is. Some of y'all got a lot of things got going on in you, but I didn't say testicle. Tistical. T-I-S-T-I-C-A-L. Egotistical. right? Because they've even given a definition to it. But when you look at human development for what it really is, that's a false term. So when you're being egotistical, when you're being iddish, aka selfish, this is why. The id is the impulsive and unconscious. I want you to understand that also. The unconscious part of our psyche, which responds directly and immediately to the instincts. Did you get that? Your psyche is your being, right? So the id is the impulsive and unconscious. You need to understand that you are not conscious of it. So that means when you're doing things, you're just doing things impulsively, unconsciously. Right? Unconsciously, you're doing these things. So therefore, when you're challenged on it and somebody says to you, you know, that was selfish that you just did, it was insensitive what you just said, you know, something you did was just, it appeared to be uncaring, right? First thing you do is defend it. Why? Because consciously you don't know that you did that. You really don't. And that's an argument, that's an easy argument. It's going to be had because so many things that we do unconsciously, right? We consciously believe what we're doing is right. We don't always connect right to it. We don't. We just don't, because it's natural. It may be inappropriate, it may be incorrect, but it's natural. Therefore, if you're unconscious of it and you're having a natural reaction or you're performing a natural action, you're not going to see the wrongness in it all the time. Therefore, sometimes after, when the argument ensues, right, that's where you see from the other person's perspective, if you're willing to, how wrong or inappropriate or insensitive or incorrect that behavior was, or the statement was. And it's still a behavior, even if it's a statement, it's a behavior, right? The personality of the newborn child is all id, and only later does it develop an ego and superego. See, and this is where grooming, appropriate grooming, comes in. From the parent, from the caretaker, right? Those are the first contacts, whoever the caretakers are, right? They're the ones, first contact of when this ego and superego begin to be developed. The id remains infantile in its function throughout a person's life, and I said that, and does not change with time or experience. It does not change with time or experience, as it is not in touch with the external world. The id has no relationship whatsoever with the external world. None. Everything that's going on around it, it has no connection to it. It can't be altered by any of those things. It can't be. Listen to what I'm saying. Be very clear on this. It can't be. There is nothing in the external world that the id is connected to. Nothing. It operates on its own. It was given to the human being for a reason. It has no connection with anything. Period. And I know what you're thinking, and I'm going to let you think that, and you deal with that. But you need to come to understand the role of the id. It is an instinctive and primitive aspect of a human being. It has no consciousness whatsoever about anything other than itself. Other than itself. The id operates on the pleasure principle, which is the idea that every wishful impulse should be satisfied immediately, regardless of the consequences. When the id achieves its demands, we experience pleasure. When it is denied, we experience unpleasure or tension. The id engages in primary process thinking, which is primitive, illogical, irrational, and fantasy-oriented. The form of process thinking has no comprehension of objective reality and is selfish and wishful in nature. And that's where we left off last week. That's where we left off last week. And it's a real heavy piece that we need to come to understand about ourselves. We really do. Because sometimes we drive our own selves insane, wondering why it is that we continue to do some of the same things that we do over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I keep hearing the cliche over and over again in my mind is that insanity is repeating the same mistake over and over again, expecting different results. I keep hearing that. But again, I'm giving you some additional knowledge here, right? Because that's a cliche that originated from a human being, right? Is it insane? Or is it an unmanaged id that's out of control? Because it is an unconscious aspect of self. Therefore, can I be insane when I'm acting unconsciously? Because insane implies a level of consciousness that has been lost. But if you've never had a consciousness of something, how can it be insane? In order for you to be insane, let me make this clear to you. In order for one to go insane, as the term is used, it would imply then that there was a level of sanity and consciousness to some degree, which is not the case with the id. It is an unconscious existence. It's like I can hold up my hand, you know there's veins in there, but you can't see the veins. You can't see the main arteries. Sometimes when they're a little pronounced you can, but you know it's there. You know the veins are there. It's blood running through every inch of the human being's body. All kind of vesicles, nerves, all those things are there. You know they're there. You know they're there. You're conscious of that. But you're not conscious of your id. There is no consciousness. You can't increase your awareness of it. You can't. Without the id, the ego and the superego. And when we start talking about, which we're getting ready to, the ego and the superego, because today we're going to talk about the ego. The superego will be the next show. But when we start looking at that, you first have to get a very clear understanding of your being. Because that's something we don't have. And if you don't delve into literature on human development, if you are not having discussions about human development, right, then you will never understand anything about yourself. And the only thing that we do is conceptualize self through the lens of so many people, because we become who people tell us we are. We become people who, we become what people tell us that we can't be. We strive to do things that are not fully a part of self, but mostly a part of conceptualization, self-conceptualization. You know, how we see ourselves, but how we see ourselves has been based on views and perspectives and such from others. But it begins with our caretakers. So that is what you're faced with when you're dealing with another person. You are dealing with the person's primitive and instinctive characteristic. That's what you're dealing with first and foremost. That's that personality. That's that makeup, the whole makeup of the human being. That's what you come into contact with first. Right? That's what you come into contact with first. And you know, sometimes when you're there, you have to understand that because it's unconscious, right? Because it's unconscious, you find the conscious aspect of yourself reacting to the unconscious aspect of the other person. So you're arguing back and forth, and truth be told, both of you are right in a sense. The circumstance being determined as being right or wrong is something that you kind of conclude after an argument. But the problem is, it's usually always an argument in order to come to the conclusion that what took place had some kind of negative impact upon me or the other person. You follow me? So we have to manage that aspect of self, right? First and foremost, we have to manage that aspect of self. It's an unconsciousness that will continue to drive our lives, and we have to manage that self. So once again, I just want to say this to be clear. The id is the self. The idea is to manage oneself, because that id, that self, is never going anywhere. It will never go anywhere. It will never change. It won't intensify. It won't decrease. It will always be just as it is. Exist within, unconsciously, and drive one's life. Okay? So now, when we go into the ego, right? The ego is that part of the id which has been modified by the direct influence of the external world. Now, it becomes a little touchy here, because now we're talking about management of the id, right? Because there's the self, which is the human existence, and there's the ego, which is the I. The id is the self of the person. So when you're being selfish, the I, the ego that we're beginning to talk about is what I strive for. So let me go on with it. The ego develops in order to mediate between the unrealistic id and the external world, the external real world. Not the ideal world, the idea world, or the fantasy world, right? But the real world, right? Because remember, I have to interact with these aspects of life every day. It is the decision-making component of personality. Now we start going into free will, right? So you have a choice, right? So now this is where it's real important to begin to find this balance here. To find the balance. Because you can continue to operate on the id and continue to be neglectful, inconsiderate, hurtful, and so on and so forth towards others, and just keep on moving. And keep on moving. While the other person's sitting there hurt, tears running down their face. That gut-wrenching feeling. They're sitting there, and you just did what you did, said what you said, and kept moving. But the part about the ego is, the ego looks back at that person, sees the tears, sees the pain and the suffering upon the person, and begs the question, right, within itself. So, it is the decision-making component of the personality. Ideally, the ego The ego works by reason, whereas the id is chaotic and totally unreasonable. And totally unreasonable. Now, when you get to this part here, I want you to also begin to look at the difference between men and women, male and female. How males and females internalize things. So when you say, see, and this again, it goes back to, for the male and female, the id is the same. The id is the same, right, in terms of its role. Now again, God in His infinite wisdom created us different because we have a different role in each other's lives, and we have to come to understand that through time. That men and women operate on something different. But when it comes to the id is going to be the id. But when you look at XX versus XY, there's some significance to that. So my book hopefully will be done out by next summer, because it's been a work in process. Why are you my X? The Y and the X chromosomes is what I'm speaking to. Not why you my X, why I leave you, or why you leave me. It's why are you my X, and understanding those things, right? And understanding the significance of an XX and an XY. Okay? So when you look at whereas the id is chaotic and totally unreasonable, you ever see somebody like, he always got drama going on? Dude, you always got something happening. Girl, how do you keep winding up? It's because of that person. Some people, right, have not managed their ego, and this is where this is coming from. They're not reacting to the external world. They're reacting to the internal world. They haven't gotten outside of themselves. But again, because it's unconscious, they don't realize they're there. And I don't think that everybody wants to be there either. They may not openly admit to you and say, hey, listen, I'm sick of my life being like this too. No, they'll tell you, well, I'm sick of being with him, or I'm sick of being with her too, and I need to just move on and get... And they don't realize what they're doing is they're unconsciously self-sabotaging their lives. Self-sabotaging their lives. Because the external world has no meaning to them. Because their id is not managed. So they always look chaotic. They always look stressed out. Because that's what the id does. And if the id is not satisfied immediately, it's hell to pay. That's that jihad. That's that holy war that goes on inside. That's jihad. That's what that is that's going on. It's a battle within the self. It's a battle within the self. It's hard, folks. When you're battling with yourself, you haven't even gotten a chance to face the world. Because you can't. You don't know how to. Because you're battling the self, and that's people's greatest battle. Themselves, not the world around them, themselves. And we don't understand that. And we don't see the battle, or remnants of the battle, or we don't experience fleeting glimpses of that battle until we're in circumstances that put us on our knees, that put us on the floor in a fetal position. That's when we begin to have those fleeting glimpses of the battle. That's when. Because you're hurting. And you ask yourself, how did I get here again? The mind is telling you, you're here again. The mind is telling you you're a failure. The mind is telling you, I hate men. I hate women. I hate life. That's the id at work. That's the id at work. You need to get what I want, and I want it now. I need satisfaction now. So you pick up the phone and you make the booty call. He left, she left, I'm calling somebody, I'll fix you. I'm calling somebody, and they call somebody up, and they want to take the pain away. And the id is saying, get it. Ain't thinking about whether you're going to get away with it or not. Ain't thinking about none of that. Get mine. That's what the id tells you. Get mine. Right? But when you're looking at things and you're managing the ego, right? The ego is operating on reason. Hold up, hold the train, stop the bus. Have you lost your mind? unfair. That's inconsiderate. That's violating the agreement that the two of you have. Why would you do that? And so on and so forth. You start looking at those things, you start looking at, damn, again? This is the reasoning. See, the ideally, and you'll hear me constantly use the terms ideal and idea, because it can be ideally or it can be ideally. Ideally is the id. Ideally are prescriptions, right? That's that prescription. And when I say prescriptions, I'm talking about something from God, you know, in terms of looking at things around you and how you interact with those things, right? And that's part of the conditioning of oneself. So ideally, the ego works by reason, whereas the id is chaotic and totally unreasonable. Now remember, I told you the id is just crazy. So when you say he's crazy, she's crazy, when you're in a relationship with a person, it's because they have an unmanaged id. Because the id is out of control. Don't mean that that person is crazy. Don't mean that they have lost their mind. It means somewhere along the line their conditioning didn't allow their id to be managed. To be managed. So the ego operates according to the reality principle, working out realistic ways of satisfying the id's demands, often compromising or postponing satisfaction to avoid negative consequences of society. And when it says negative consequences of society, it means every aspect of society, be it relationships, intimate relationships with another person, sexual relationships with another person, marriage, love, whatever it is. Society as a whole, anything that you interact with in society, right? So when I said that, when I covered the part of the ego says, oh, stop, put the phone down. Why are you calling an ex up? Because you're in a dilemma with your current partner. Why? Is that going to be healthy? Is that going to be a good outcome? Is that who you are? Is that what you want? Do you realize how hurtful that would be to the other person? That's what the ego begins to do with the id. And as much as the id is sitting there shaking his head with his hands on his head, talking about, I don't care, I want mine now. Right? Because that's actually what the id is doing. Right? The ego is saying, well, let's think about this for a minute. Let's think about this for a minute. Let's stop and think about this for a minute. You're being irrational. And this is a conversation that you're having inside of yourself. You're having this conversation with yourself. Again, the term self. You are having this conversation with your id. That's the self. You are having a conversation with yourself about a decision that you need to make. A rational decision that has to be made. And it's a battle. It's a battle. You're battling with yourself about a decision. And sometimes that decision takes so much out of you, it wears you down. And that's why sometimes we make a decision to do, and then we withdraw that decision, because we're faced with the same circumstance again. And then we give back again. And then we take back again. And we go back and forth with that, back and forth again, because the conscious and the unconscious are at odds within the self. Within the self. And it has nothing to do really with the external in one sense, but most to do with the internal self. What it has to do with the external is you know, looking at the reality, right? It's the rational thinking, right? So that's why, as a therapist, you know, I'm always using what's called rational emotive behavior therapy techniques to bring about change in behavior. So I use it for myself. It's always about the thinking. Is my thinking rational or irrational? What is my belief about the circumstance? You know, and what is the consequence as a result of that belief? Right? Because that's what it always comes down to. So this is the evaluative thing that you do within yourself, unbeknownst to you. You're looking at circumstance, right? And you're telling yourself, well, I believe and I think that everybody must and everybody should, and I can't stand when this happens. They call them the must-itises, the should-itises, the can't-stand-itises. All those things that happen inside of you, and you begin to look at those things, right? You begin to look at those things. That's what the ego is doing. The ego is doing that. The ego is saying, well, no. Everybody doesn't put on a turn signal when they go and turn. They don't do it. Some will just stop, put the turn signal on and do it. Some will just swing around if they think that they can do it conveniently without interrupting the flow of traffic. That's their thinking. Right, wrong, or indifferent. If I can keep on going and I can swing that turn and it doesn't interrupt the flow of traffic, that's what I did. You're 4 car lengths back. Why is that a problem for you? Because you're thinking. That's the id. The must-itises, the can't-stand-itises, the should-itises, driving the person. So the ego considers social realities and norms. Social realities and norms. And again, norms are established in the home. That's the role of the caretaker, to establish what the norms are. Now, just because when your child comes downstairs in the morning with their face washed, their teeth brushed, their hands washed, they got the shirt tucked in, they got the clothes looking right, and they sit to the table, they don't put the elbows on the table, they sit there and they eat all of their food, they get up from the table, they push the chair back up to the table, they take the bowl, they put it in the sink. Just because they do that at home means absolutely nothing if they don't repeat that same behavior outside of the home. That's when you can see whether your child has adopted those environmental norms, or the adaptation take place and they gravitated more towards the things that happen around them outside of the home. Because when I get a best friend, that's my homie, my road dog, right? I begin to like and dislike things that they like and dislike. As children, we do that, right? As children, we do that. Now remember, the id is infantile. The id is infantile. Therefore, to do these kind of things is a natural thing. So when people say, well, I'm my own man, I'm my own woman, I don't follow nobody, this, that, and the other, you followed something, you followed somebody, maybe unconsciously, but you gravitated towards something, right, that developed your thinking, right, that established you to want to go in that direction, right, because we all take direction, we all need direction, and sometimes the direction we go in is consciously or unconsciously, right, because as a parent, we parent in 2 ways. We do things for our children that our parents never did for us, that we thought that our parents should have done or do for us. And then we also do things, we also don't do things to our children that our parents did to us that we disliked. That's how we parent, right? That's exactly how we parent. So we have to look at all of these things, right, in order to fully understand what's going on with ourselves. We have to understand that the ego is very significant, right, to our continued growth and development, right? We have to understand that.
I made a lot of changes throughout the years of my life, many changes that were necessary for me to continue to grow as a person. Raised in South Philadelphia Project in Wilson Park from 1965 till 1978, my family did their best to keep me from falling prey to the streets. And even though I got involved in some of the things in the street, I didn't get totally.